Well, the Odyssey is one of the most exciting pieces of literature, and it is fascinating to think of it in relation to the other great epic attributed to Homer, the Iliad. The very stark contrast in theme, where we have war in the Iliad and then the after effects of war. We have heroes and kings in the Iliad, and in the Odyssey, we have slaves and women, very prominent. So we want to think about how Homer, in this follow-up to the Iliad, is questioning the heroic code that he already started to interrogate in the Iliad itself, with Achilles wondering whether glory is worth it, whether Kleos, renown, is worth dying early. We see in the Odyssey that very profound desire to get back to life, to reassume the everyday routines of political life, of domesticity. And so that's very poignant. We have a lot of poignant scenes, and we indeed, from a poem that we can place around the year 700 BC, we can sense with this man Odysseus a very accessible kind of subjectivity. That is, don't we all know what it means to want to get back home? Don't we all know what it means to be lost for a time, and to feel as if the very forces of heaven are working against one's normalized life, right? So these are very existential kind of questions that the Odyssey poses for us. We also have, though, questions that we can think of in terms of the very shape of Western civilization. Is the great warrior the builder of culture and civilization, or is the man of cunning more like I don't know, someone who has the skills of a commercial genius, let's say, right? So we have two different models in the Iliad and the Odyssey of what it means to bring civilization to fruition, and that's worth our consideration, I think. Between the Iliad and the Odyssey, there are many events that are related in the so-called epic cycle. One of the important events is that after the death of Achilles, his armor was awarded by the vote of the army to Odysseus rather than to Ajax the Greater. And Ajax kills himself because he can't suffer this loss of glory. But that is, in the poetic tradition itself, there was this sense that there was a shift after the war, after the passing of the great hero Achilles, that the other great hero Odysseus is the one who is recognized as preeminent. And we know that from the stories. Again, one of the stories being told within the Odyssey as a flashback is that Odysseus is the one responsible for ultimately breaking the stalemate by coming up with the contrivance of the Trojan horse. So, is it enough to be the berserker stormtrooper, right? Achilles is breaking through the lines and he's going up to the walls of Troy. And yet that wasn't enough. That wasn't enough to end the war. What it took was cunning, actually deceit. I mean, a lot of it wasn't the most honorable way to win a war. So that's another question, right? What is one willing to do to win? What is one willing to do to survive? And that is a very important question for all of us. The issue of the rapacious alpha male, as I could put it, was raised when we talked about Gilgamesh. How necessary is it to have a man who is like Gilgamesh before Enkidu came on the scene. How important is it to build civilization that you have a man of enormous appetites who's kind of a force of nature, right? And I think it's important for us to think, that kind of, how much is that in fact the case of building civilization, or is in fact a force that has to always be managed in order for civilization to survive? That's another issue I want to put on the table. Just a few thoughts about the very opening of the poem. Andra moi enepe musa palutropon hosmala pola plangte epe troies hieron toliethron eperson. So tell me about a man of many turns, palutropos, a man who's been blown about in many ways, but also has many turns of mind, right? A devious intellect. Tell me, Muse, about this man. Andra, the first word of the poem is in the Iliad, it's rage, the rage of Achilles. In the Odyssey, it's Andra, this man, this male. Tell me about this this devious man, Muse, and how he was lost after he had wrecked the town of Troy, after he had come to know the mind of many peoples, right, because of his journeys. And that's the other issue is in our wanderings on the way back home. Is there wisdom to be gained, right? That note of suffering in these books that we've selected here, that note of suffering is very poignant. Is there some wisdom that we can gain from that suffering? That obviously is something the tragedians will talk about, and we can see whether that's already here in Homer.
Question number 1. Is Odysseus admirable? How much does he differ from the template of the warrior hero? Does cleverness serve the ends of civilization better than war? Question number 2. How do divine and human planning interact in the Odyssey? How are fate, prophecy, fortune, and freedom related? What different instances of decision-making are presented? Question number 3. How does the Odyssey show hospitality, xenia, as measuring a person's level of civilization? Why might the essence of civilization be bound up with hospitality? Question number 4. Have you ever felt exiled, far from what was familiar, adrift on a sea of suffering? Does wandering lead onto the path of wisdom? Does wisdom make being at home in this world possible?
And that I want to especially highlight question 3, xenia, and that relationship of hospitality, which really makes networks possible, and therefore I think civilization. Just to tip my hand there as far as the answer, but that is something to track, because it's prominent in other books that we didn't include here, other chapters, but it's already very, very important.